In today's video, it's time to talk about the big one, what many people see as GT7's biggest issue, the tracks. But before we get into this video, I'm trying to push the channel to 60,000 subscribers by the end of this year. So if you like this kind of content and you want to stay up to date with everything Gran Turismo related, then feel free to leave a like, subscribe, and of course, turn your notifications on. Anyway, with that, let's go ahead and get into it. First up, day one versus now. In this section of the video, I'm going to compare day one GT7 track list and layout list to current day, or where we are now. Of course, the world circuits are split into three different categories: Americas, Europe, and Asia and Oceania. And of course, we're going to start off with Americas. Now, as for day one in Americas, there were quite a few decent locations. We had in the USA, Blue Moon Bay Speedway. This is of course a more recent Gran Turismo original track. Now, this featured the layouts of full course reverse, infield A, infield B, infield A reverse, and of course infield B reverse. As for the second track, we have WeatherTech Raceway Laguna Seca, an absolute icon when it comes to the Gran Turismo series. This featured just one single layout, and of course that would be the full course featuring the notorious corkscrew. Next up, we had the Trial Mountain Circuit. This was a returning fan favourite with a complete revamp. This had two different layouts, full course and the full course reverse layout. As for the next track, it's an off-road one in Colorado Springs, which features the lake and lake reverse. So after travelling off-road, we are going to head back to the tarmac with the next location, which is Willow Springs International Raceway. And of course here we have multiple layouts. We have the Big Willow, Streets of Willow Springs, and of course Horse Thief Mile, which I genuinely really enjoy, especially in a go-kart. Then of course we have the reverse layout of the Streets and Horse Thief Mile. Notably absent is a reverse layout of the Big Willow. Up next is going to be Special Stage Route X. Of course, this is the huge, massive oval on the full course. It is 18.82 miles long. It's an absolute behemoth with the one layout. As for the next one, it is Interlagos over in Brazil as the only South American track in game. And that is going to be the one single layout there of the full course. There is no reverse there. As for the next one, it's going to be back to the USA and Fisherman's Ranch. Of course, this is sort of the Nordschleife of the rally tracks in GT7, featuring two layouts, which is the full course and of course the full course reverse. After that, we had Northern Isle Speedway, a track that you probably even forgot was in game. You'll only really see it in the early game, and that features one layout, which is the full course or a half-mile oval. And of course, then we have the big one in the USA, Daytona. We have the tri-oval and of course the road course, which give both different vibes depending on sort of the time of day and the different cars you're racing. Our first post-launch track was Watkins Glen International. This came along with two different layouts, the long course and of course the short course to match. I genuinely really enjoy Watkins Glen. I know it's not for everyone, but for me personally, this is a massively solid addition. After that, in November of 2022, we got Road Atlanta with one single layout and the full course at that. I always feel it's unfortunate that we didn't get the sort of shorter course layout there. Up next was probably the most notorious post-launch track in GT7, that is Grand Valley Highway 1, completely revamping Grand Valley as we knew it into a highway layout. And unfortunately for me, I personally prefer the original. However, Highway 1 is visually stunning, bringing with it four layouts: Highway 1, South, and Reverse for both of those layouts. However, it is worth mentioning it released alongside the PSVR 2 update, so it kind of makes sense visually. Up next, we have Canada and Lake Louise. This was released, of course, in 2023 once again, this time in Spec 2, and brought with it 6 different layouts. We have the tri-oval, the short track, long track, and reverse layouts of all three of them. It is worth to note that this brought snow to GT7. It really is unfortunate that still to this day it's the only place with snow and a use for snow tyres. So next up then, we're going to head over to Europe. We're going to start with the day one locations and of course layouts, and we'll start in the UK with one of two UK tracks, that is Brands Hatch. Of course, we have the Grand Prix circuit and the Indy circuit. I genuinely really love the Indy layout. But next we have UK and Goodwood. Of course, completely absent is the hill climb that we saw in GT6. This is purely just the actual racetrack itself. So one layout on the full course. Next up is Belgium, and of course Spa, a pretty much must have for any racing title, and it is in GT7. Now it is worthy to note that on launch this only featured the one layout, that is the full course. The 24-hour layout was added post launch, and I will talk about that a little bit more later on. But as for the launch GT7, it was just the one. Over to Germany next, and the Nürburgring. Again, a little bit like Spa, I'll talk about the other layouts after, but here we have the Nordschleife, the Tourist, the 24-hour and Grand Prix. Both the endurance layout and sprint layout were added post-launch to GT7, so will not be counted overall for day one GT7 layouts. Next up we head over to France, and we have Alsace. This is a Gran Turismo original track, one of the more recent ones that they've added, of course I believe coming in GT Sport. So we have Village, Village Reverse, Test Course and Test Course Reverse. All of those were day one, of course 4 total layouts there. As for the next location, we head back to the next part of France, which is over on the left, and of course that is going to be 24-hour Le Mans, or of course the Circuit de la Sarthe, which brings with it 2 different layouts. We have the full course and the no chicane, which of course removes the chicanes. After that we head over to Switzerland for Deep Forest Raceway, of course a GT original. It has 2 layouts, the full course and full course reverse. It is worthy to note that we once saw rain in a trailer here, but it is yet to come. After that we head over to Austria and the Red Bull Ring with its 2 layouts. It has the full course and the short track. For me personally, I'm just not a fan of the short track here, but I genuinely do enjoy the full course. After that we head to Italy. This is going to be Lake Maggiore, and I believe it has the most layouts in GT7 period. It has the full course reverse, then it has the center reverse, East End and East End reverse, West End and West End reverse, East and East reverse, West and West reverse. That is absolutely ridiculous. And again, it's a Gran Turismo original track, originating I believe in Sport, and unfortunately I absolutely hate it. I'm going to be totally honest there. Next up again in Italy is Monza. Of course, in terms of Monza, it's another kind of staple for any racing game. It has 2 layouts, the full course and the no chicane, which of course just removes that notorious turn 1 chicane. Then we have another Gran Turismo original, this time in Croatia, Dragon Trail, or Trial should I say. It has Seaside, Gardens, Seaside Reverse and Gardens Reverse. Of course this features the notorious Death Chicane. After that we have France and Circuit de Saint Croix, so the 3rd French track. Now in terms of this one, again it's a Gran Turismo original, and unfortunately because it's more recent it's just not as good as what they used to produce. We have layout A reverse, layout B reverse, layout C, which is personally my favourite of the bunch, and layout C reverse. Okay, so we're going to move away from original tracks to real world locations. Next up in Spain is Circuit de Barcelona Catalunya, of course known as the Spanish Grand Prix circuit to many, and of course on launch it featured the one single layout, and that was the Grand Prix layout. There were none of the other layouts day one in GT7, so post-launch additions were the no chicane, national layout, and of course the rallycross layout. Again, all 3 of them were completely absent from day one, and in terms of the rallycross layout, I would genuinely class this as its own location, a little bit like we see with Sardinia with road and of course off-road. Speaking of Sardinia, we have windmills, and this is the off-road variant in Sardinia. Of course this is a European rally track. It features 2 locations, the full course and full course reverse. For me personally, I do prefer it over the likes of Colorado Springs, but it still feels a little rather uninspiring. And of course in Sardinia once again is the road track. This features multiple different layouts. So we have layout A, which acts as the full course, layout A reverse, layout B, which I genuinely enjoy. I love that kind of downhill slope and that really fast section. Then we have layout B reverse, layout C, which you barely ever see but is fantastic for some of these slower, more hatchback like cars in the game. And then we have layout C reverse, which is of course the reverse of layout C. So that concludes the day one locations and layouts. Let's talk post launch then. The first post launch launch track we ever got in GT7 was the 24-hour layout of Spa. Now it is worth noting that all it does is really change the start and stop location and gives you a unique pit stop animation. That is it. Next up is the Nürburgring, in which we've got 2 additional layouts. Those are the Endurance, which is the sprint circuit combined with the Nordschleife, and of course the sprint circuit itself, which funnily enough was absent from GT7 on day 1. Next up is more additional layouts at Barcelona. We have the no chicane layout, the national layout, and of course the rallycross layout. However, as mentioned in terms of that rallycross layout, I would say that it basically acts as its own complete track. It really does feel like the only proper true rallycross layout that we have in GT7. I absolutely love that thing. Next up, in terms of proper additional locations, we had one in Switzerland and Eiger Nordwand, of course returning from the more HD era of Gran Turismo. Unfortunately, it only featured 2 layouts. That was full course and full course reverse. Again, if you know your Gran Turismo history, you'll probably realise it is notably absent of a lot of the additional layouts. Of course, the main thing of note here is that the full layout that we used to see at Eiger Nordwand is completely absent, and it's a major shame considering how cool that thing used to be. Now, of course, this is the most recent track to GT7. As for Asia, this is where things get a little bit bleak. Now, Polyphony being a Japanese studio, it's strange that we've never had a single layout added or single location added here. So as for the ones that are in game, they're the exact same as day 1, or top list features with 2 different layouts, the full course and shortcut course. Japan, of course, once again has Suzuka Circuit, my favourite circuit in the entire world, that features 2 layouts, the full course and east course. Again, that is basically the shortened version. Japan once again with Broadbeam Raceway, this is the full course, and of course the full course reverse, so very very similar there, just opposite directions. Japan with Kyoto Driving Park, once again a sport original track. I genuinely prefer this in terms of the original ones. I think it's one of the better, more recent ones. It features Yamagiwa, Miyabi, Yamagiwa Reverse, Yamagiwa and Miyabi, and Yamagiwa and Miyabi Reverse, which acts as the sort of full track, basically combines the 2 together. Next up is Japan and Tsukuba Circuit, of course another very iconic Japanese track, very very popular for time trials. This just features the one layout, which is the full course at 1.27 miles. Then we have Tokyo Expressway, perhaps the most overused location in GT7, however I will admit it's kind of grown on me recently. Of course, Tokyo Expressway pretty much acts as the replacement for the original Tokyo layouts in Gran Turismo. So as for the layouts, we have the clockwise variant of central, east and south, and then we have the counterclockwise of all 3 of them as well. Notably though, and pretty impressive, all kind of 6 of these layouts feel different just because of how it massively changes up. I think it probably goes a long way as to why I've started to appreciate Tokyo Expressway a lot more in recent times. Next up is Japan once again and Fuji International Speedway. Of course, this is a very iconic Japanese track. Of course, Fuji in the background there. It has the full course and short course, but that just sort of removes the chicane, and that's pretty much it. Next up, once again in Japan, and another Gran Turismo original and probably one of the most iconic tracks ever made. It's High Speed Ring, featuring full course and full course reverse, both at 2.70 miles long. And from Australia, our lone track over there, it is Mount Panorama Circuit, Bathurst, on the full course single layout. I'm going to say this for all of Australia, when it comes to racing games, I feel like that country always gets the short straw and is massively unrepresented. So let's look at the total locations and layouts then. So day 1, after manually counting, it was 34 locations and 97 layouts, and now it is 39 locations and 118 layouts. By no means are either of those small numbers for a racing game. So after the next section, I'm going to go a little bit more in detail talking about the numbers and such, but in terms of overall locations and layouts, that's really nothing to scoff at. In fact, there's a lot more than even I originally expected. So next up, let's talk about the rumours then. Now, it is worth noting, in this section of the video, I'm only going to talk about the tracks that got put in the files or got a credible mention from a credible source. I won't be mentioning stuff like Silverstone because that was just mentioned by people in comment sections and then spread like it was gospel. And of course, there were some of those kind of mocked up screenshots which were hilarious, but not official. So the first one that actually got mentioned was Red Rock Valley Speedway. Of course, this is a Gran Turismo 2 original track. It has never ever appeared in any other GT title, and it was actually, from what I can gather, in the files of GT7 very early in its post-launch life cycle. However, don't get your hopes up, it was removed. Now, if there's anything I've learned about game design and such from covering Gran Turismo 7 for the last 3 years on this channel, is that this happens quite a bit. These kind of name titles and files genuinely seem to get put in the game as placeholders and such, and will then just be removed over time. It's a lot of the same kind of deal that we see with Lotus being in the data mined files for GT7 when it first launched. Of course, there was the whole thing with the sort of licensing issue with Lotus and Polyphony. However, the files did remain in the game, and of course they were also in GT Sport as well. They were just sort of carried over. Of course, they have since been removed, and it was the exact same for Red Rock Valley Speedway. Okay, the next credible track that was rumored and of course appeared in the files but hasn't appeared yet, of course, was Circuit de Gilles Villeneuve, or the Montreal Grand Prix circuit. This kind of blew up in mid 2023 before the Spec 2 update, and a lot of people assumed it would have come alongside that update, but it didn't. In fact, we did get a Canadian track in the form of Lake Louise. So I'm kind of under the assumption now that the whole name for Circuit de Gilles Villeneuve just ended up being Lake Louise. And the final one, which got mentioned in 2024, early 2024 in fact, of course, is Twin Ring Motegi, which of course hasn't appeared yet and hasn't even appeared in the files. So how did this one come around? Well, it was actually mentioned by a Super GT driver on the weekend that they were racing there. He went on to mention that he thought Polyphony Digital were working on getting this track in game when he was sort of approached about Gran Turismo and Twin Ring Motegi being there. So again, a little bit different for Twin Ring Motegi, but I would say this is one that would probably make sense considering these Super GT cars in game and the Super Formulas and such. It would make sense that we've never had a post-launch Asia track added to GT7, so why not let it be Twin Ring Motegi? And for me, this is the most interesting of the bunch. So for the final section of this video then, what really is the issue with GT7 and tracks? When we look at the numbers, it absolutely smashes it out of the park on the number game. 39 tracks, 82 layouts and 118 configurations. Even compared to many other racing titles out there, that is pretty huge numbers and will probably beat the majority of them in terms of that number game. But again, numbers don't tell the whole story. I would say the first and probably biggest issue that GT7 has is the events. And I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, but a lot of players want their hand to be held when it comes to the game. They want to be kind of shown where to go and of course be given the tracks in game through official events. They don't necessarily want to head to the custom races and have to set everything up themselves. We also tend to see a trend where the Polyphony setup events actually pay much better than the ones done in custom races. So again, people want to head to them over creating their entire own custom race and being paid a lot less than they would for an official one. But again, when it comes to the events themselves, they tend to head to the same tracks, same layouts and same locations over and over again, meaning that a lot of the unique layouts in GT7 and a lot of the tracks go completely underutilized, given the feel that there's a lot less tracks in GT7 than there actually is. Next up is missing tracks, but what do I mean by that? Well, when it comes to the early days of Gran Turismo on the PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2 and sometimes even the PlayStation 3, Polyphony were known for making absolute bangers of original tracks, and it's what made Gran Turismo so attractive. Even if they couldn't license the sort of real world tracks in game, they would tend to have incredible original track design. And unfortunately, I would say this has dropped off from sort of sport onwards, but I guess in any title up to then, their original track creation was fantastic. And of course, we've seen the return of the likes of Deep Forest and Trial Mountain, but of course, on the other hand, we do have notable absences such as Midfield. Of course, we have Autumn Ring missing, Apricot Hill, Seattle, which I believe they cannot actually go ahead and recreate now because it's changed so much that they wouldn't be able to scan the location. At least That's what I've heard anyway. But again, when it comes to GT original tracks, there was numerous. I could go on forever talking about the amazing original tracks of the early games, and a lot of them are entirely absent and who knows, may never ever return again. But in terms of those original tracks, people do tend to have their favourites, and when they see it's not in the most recent title, they're going to want it back. Of course, everyone's a sucker for nostalgia, and even I am. You know, something like Midfield to me, which is my personal favourite original Gran Turismo track of all time, would absolutely put me over the moon if I ever saw it return again. So again, we have the missing tracks, I guess. And the final issue is that it's quality over quantity when it comes to polyphony. I think it's well known at this point that a single car model takes them upwards of 270 days, which is a ridiculous amount. And there's no question when it comes to car models in racing games, polyphony always go the extra mile to ensure that every single detail is as near perfect as possible. And I would say the same goes with their tracks. When it comes to trackside detail, hidden little Easter eggs and such, they are absolutely brimming to the max in terms of their on-track detail. It's pretty ridiculous. And of course, when it comes to the next thing, polyphony, whilst they're a hugely massively known company and Gran Turismo is a behemoth of a racing franchise, as for the amount of people at the company, they are relatively small in comparison to a lot of other companies. So when it comes to this whole quality over quantity, it does tend to have an incredibly slow turnaround in comparison to other games out there. Now, you probably put two and two together here, but of course, when you've got a smaller development team in the modern world of course, the modern day consoles and such, things tend to take a lot more time just because of how more complex and more detailed it is. And of course, that's going to shine through when you have a game like Gran Turismo 7 promoted as a live service title, ends up falling behind at times. And of course, as time ticks on and things don't happen or show up in game, then that's when people get complacent and start to get a little bit annoyed, myself included. There's been many times where I've just been kind of burnt out and I really want a new track, but of course these things take time and they're a smaller development team. So in that sense, I can appreciate their kind of chase for perfection when it comes to track detail, car detail and such. But of course, the trade-off for that is the fact that it just takes a lot longer, and we end up in a situation now where we're in a huge dry spell of almost a year. And of course, even if we look as far back as GT Sport, Watkins Glen showed up in the files of Gran Turismo Sport and actually wouldn't release until Gran Turismo 7. So really, there's a hint at just how long these things take, and that was a PlayStation 4 only title. I'm probably going to get a lot of stick for this, but for me personally, I do genuinely prefer the quality over quantity. I would much rather be, you know, absolutely diving into a new track, racing it, driving it in multiple different cars and looking around the scenery and finding all the different hidden secrets around it than just kind of getting a, I guess, lifeless version of a track because they were able to make it quicker. But admittedly, that's not going to be the same for everyone. And of course, that's when you end up with a very frustrated fan base who just seems to be waiting constantly. So in conclusion, is there really a track problem with Gran Turismo 7? Well, when you look at the numbers, no, not really. But if you dig a little bit deeper under the surface, the cracks do tend to show. And of course, that explains a lot of the frustrations with the player base and of course, where we're kind of at now with Gran Turismo 7. Anyway, I want to give a huge thank you to all of you guys who watched at home and a huge thank you to all of my channel members listed on screen now. Again, if you did enjoy this video, it is massively appreciated if you leave a like and of course subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care guys, peace.